It's an honor to be here today, an honor to speak on the topic of Teshuvah in an age of mass incarceration, but it is an even greater honor to share the stage with these three individuals. I'm going to introduce them briefly, but it is my hope that over the hour of our conversation, you get to hear their unique stories, their beautiful voices, and about the incredible work they are doing in the world right now. So just briefly, Terrance Coffie is the Community Affairs Liaison at the Doe Fund. He is a graduate of the NYU Silver School of Social Work, and he is now an adjunct professor there teaching forensic justice. He is the founder of Educate, Don't Incarcerate, and he is a fierce advocate on behalf of juvenile justice reform in New York City. Topeka K. Sam is the founder and executive director of the Ladies of Hope Ministries and the founder of Hope House, New York City. She is a senior advisor to New Yorkers United for Justice, and if you tune in to Sirius XM satellite radio on Sunday mornings, you can hear her on the Topeka K. Sam show. Kempis Ghani Songster joins us today from Philadelphia, where he works at the Amistad Law Project. He is the founder of several nonprofits, including the Right to Redemption, and he is a tireless crusader to end death by incarceration, also known as incarceration without parole. He's also a passionate climate activist. Just the three of you, I want to give you a word about our congregation. Central is hungry for justice, hungry for change, and today probably just a little hungry. So I want you to know that we're going to do our best to keep you awake, keep you interested. Now, before we even get to the topic of Teshuvah, I want to start with the actual conditions of confinement. In an interview on Ear Hustle, a podcast that's recorded from inside San Quentin State Prison in California, former Governor Jerry Brown said that prisons thrive behind a veil of secrecy. So I want to ask the three of you right now, can each of you lift that veil and just share one specific issue of confinement?
Shalom. I worked on my Yiddish, so you guys in regards to that question, it's almost tempting to really try to say one specific issue and lifting a veil and seeing what lies behind it when we think about confinement in and of itself. And for me, when we think about the conditions of confinement, I can say what needs to be changed is everything. But for the sake of this conversation and what we're discussing today, one of the main areas that I would focus in on would be solitary confinement. And this is where an individual is taken from the general population and put into usually a 5x10 and 5x cell. I think here in New York they call it the SHUS, Solitary Housing Unit. Where I'm from, we call it the box. And this is a place where we have also learned through data and research that this is where a mental decomposition begins to take place in an individual. I could share that from my academic perspective, and we could do that, but I would prefer to also just highlight my own personal experience with going to the box. And being there in the first 30 days, it's almost like you're there, you're dealing with it, and you hear the yelling, you hear the men being beaten, and you're sitting in that space, and you don't have a way to see anyone, so it's as if you just listen for noise, and we have a way of communicating through kites and sending notes. And in my first 30 days, it was that you try to understand time because there are no windows. So you can determine what part of the day it is based upon the food that's being brought to you. Usually if you get if they don't forget you in that space, you're let out once a day to take a shower. And in that process, and the reason it's important for me to say this because I'm not opposed to the use of solitary confinement. What I am opposed to is the abusive use of solitary confinement. New York just passed a law that restricts the use of solitary confinement for 30 days In the past, we have had men stay in this unit for years, and during that process is where the mental degradation, the decomposition takes place. And by the time an individual is let out of there, it's hard. It's almost the idea of staying there, as opposed to the dehumanizing, and he is disconnected from another human being, and that existence continues to take place. And not only after, during incarceration, we're also talking about being released into a society where this individual has spent 10, 20 to 30 years in this unit, which really begins a process of a mental breakdown, decomposition. So that's one area, and I'll stop there.
Thank you. Well, first, thank you for allowing us to join in this holy day with you. I'm humbled and grateful. And Rabbi Hilly, who is incredible, as I didn't know it was all of that from your bio. Thank you so much for inviting me to join today as well. And so I would start by saying, to which you started to say, Terrence, that I don't believe that prisons and jails, period, are any place for anyone. But specifically in the work that I do around women and girls, definitely not. There are other ways that you can be held accountable without having been put in a cage. And from what I've learned through my experience being incarcerated for 3 years, when people are harmed and they need healing, people respond a certain way. And if you are already living in a space of darkness and you go into marked darkness, that's not going to beget light. So there's no way that you can look for a person truly to find true transformation without one, or even a quality of redemption without one being able to see light, and for me it was through the grace of God. But typically if you don't find it through that, you will die mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And so I'm adamant, when I think about one condition, they all are terrible. Whether you think about, access to quality education, when they took away the Pell Grants, in federal prison where I was, there was no access to education. The adult continuing education courses they gave for women were knitting and crocheting. That is not a marketable skill that's going to help you to transform your life. When you think about the conditions of confinement, women, we have, monthly cycles. We didn't have access to free health. We didn't have access to free pads or tampons. We had to go and pass legislation to ensure that that's happening. When you think about women being shackled during child labor, that's happening currently in this country still. That again, what is a woman going to do during child labor? I mean, where is she going? And to think that you're going to continue to dehumanize and treat people inhumane just because they made a mistake is completely, out of line, if I could just say it bluntly. And so I would not encourage these spaces. You think about solitary confinement, and my sister Evie, that's what you talk about all the time from your experience with solitary confinement, but also one of my greatest mentors, Susan Rosenberg, who's here in her book, American Radical, talks about being in solitary confinement. And so I think that is incredibly devastating, but all of these conditions in these spaces are subpar, they're hazardous to people's health, mental health. And unless we are really truly looking for ways that people can, one, be held accountable, but two, find ways of rehabilitation, transformation, and redemption, they're not going to happen in places of darkness.
I'm so honored and humbled to be here. I like to open up, these kind of critical conversations that I participate in by invoking two pieces of wisdom. The first is by Vincent Harding, late social justice advocate, contemporary Martin Luther King. And he said that the entire course of human history leads us to right here and right now, wherever we find ourselves. And from right here and now, constrained but not determined by the past, we are obligated to imagine a future that could restore the innocence of the first day. The second piece is often cited by Bob Mosley. It's by Kingman Brewster, who was the president of Yale University in the 1960s. It's on the epitaph. It's the epitaph on his gravestone, and it said, "The presumption of innocence is not just a legal concept. In common law and in common sense, it requires a generosity of spirit towards the stranger, the expectation of what is best rather than what is worst in the other. And this concept of innocence is what became something I became very curious about it, considering it's something I felt that I lost quite early in my life when I made the decision to run away from home right here in this city, in Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. In 1987, at the age of 15, a week short of completing the 9th grade, all the way to Philadelphia, where I live now, in 1987, where I would join a gang, an organized drug syndicate, and for the next 4 months was holed up in fortified row homes, selling cocaine with other runaway children from all over the country, all right? And 4 months later, in one of those houses, an explosive act of violence took place that I was directly involved in and responsible for the loss of another human life, and was sentenced to life without parole or death by incarceration at the age of 15. And in Pennsylvania, it's not like New York where it's 20 years or however amount of years and you see the parole board. There is no parole board process. You're sent to prison to die, which is why it's increasingly known as death by incarceration in the city. So I say all that to give context. So when I speak, I'm not speaking from the perspective or through the lens of data or statistics. I'm speaking as a witness from the bowels. And I spent 3 years in solitary confinement, and one stint, then another year and a half, and another year. So that's what I was gonna say, all right? And I know about the assaults on education inside the prison industrial complex. But I think what I would talk about, something that needs to be lifted up, is the condemnation of people, the throwing away of all kinds of people, especially children, women who have children on the outside, elderly and mentally ill people who are sent to prison to die. Some people who may even have achieved their masters and PhDs and could be of more service to community on the outside. I think we need to lift up, not that they deserve to be home, because I don't think I deserve to be here, right? But what does the community deserve from us, right? I think that's the bigger question, and I think that's what needs to be lifted up more. That's the veil we need to lift on how the prison system is serving the best interests of the community at large by its incarceration and politics and practices.
As a Jewish community, we are currently in our individual and collective season of Teshuvah. Teshuvah is defined by the Rabbi Moses Maimonides as the act of repentance, atonement, and return. In Europe and the United States, prisons were initially designed as places of Teshuvah, places for reflection, for rehabilitation. Listening to you all speak right now, it's obvious that prisons are not meeting that goal. So I want to ask you, what is one specific issue that prevents people from doing true Teshuvah, true healing, and return to the community after incarceration?
I was thinking over that, and we have a saying when you go to prison. Can I use profanity? Not much, not a little bit. We have a saying, and it was, I don't know if you saw this, some of the old prison movies, when they say that, the saying says that your soul belongs to God, but your ass belongs to me. In whatever state you would find that, particularly in the South, you would hear that. And for me as an advocate and as an African American, the concept of Teshuvah is something that I don't really believe that is applicable to the African American experience with the criminal justice system. Because the first thing we have to understand is to put that in historical context, because African Americans were brought to this country enslaved under the premises of this idea of God saving these people for whatever that means. But in reference to the relationship with African Americans and the criminal justice system, our relationship, we were already enslaved. So when I began to discuss the criminal justice system, we have to remember that that began after the Emancipation Proclamation. The introduction of the black codes, the introduction of the pig laws, the introduction of convict leasing, where this population that was once enslaved was now the engine of an economic system, and this system had to create a way in which to keep that system going. And thus, we have the relationship of African Americans within our current criminal justice system, and that's historical. And we talk about being discriminatory sentences today, but we can go back. They have various movies that show when men of color were incarcerated, they were incarcerated at 5 times the rates of their white counterparts for the exact same crimes. So, in my opinion, the idea of Teshuvah, and I've read, not so much from the Jewish perspective, but we had this idea that it was the prisons were structured a certain way in order for individuals to look to the sun to find repentance from God, and this whole, that whole concept, which the system failed that a long time ago. What individuals within our criminal justice system became were a commodity for economic system, what we now refer to as the prison industrial complex. But historically, when you go back, that was already taking place on plantations, that men who were once released for minor offenses, and let me not even do that, because those weren't offenses that were taking place, so we wouldn't do justice to say that African Americans who were released from slavery, who were somehow picked up for trying to walk on the back roads on the railroad tracks because they didn't want to be in the city, that they were criminalized for that, or the men who would steal food because they were hungry to feed their families on this trek going to they do not know where in order to build a life for themselves. So I would just want to say that. So has the system failed? The system failed from the beginning.
I want to lift up one thing you said, which is, as a Jewish community, it's important for us to recognize that Teshuvah in this conversation really is a countercultural and radical notion, that true Teshuvah doesn't exist today in our system of incarceration. And so, as Rabbi Buchdahl said, when we think about our Teshuvah today, it is bound up in the Teshuvah of all those in our country. And just to keep that idea in mind as we continue our conversation.
So just to add, and I agree, excuse me, the system was designed to do exactly what it has done. So when you design a system that, kidnaps people off the street, puts them in cages without resources and opportunity, and then releases them, what do you think is going to happen? How do you truly have an opportunity of redemption if you have no resources, you have no connections, you have no levels of education, you have no housing, you've lost your children, you don't know where they are? What can you do? I mean, I think it's common sense to say that that is a failure system. So the only way, and I'll try to keep it brief because I know we have to move along, the only way to really accomplish this would be to provide access, opportunity, and resources to people in communities that are already marginalized. So before people are even going into prison, how do you stop that from happening, right? We make sure that we are giving people those opportunities, whether it's education, high school, elementary school, grade school, whether it's giving people real opportunities for higher education, whether it's understanding and opening up different areas where people can even have careers and employment. People only get to see what's typically just readily in front of them. And unless we as a community, and that's everyone's responsibility, to be able to teach and share what you have learned and have access to someone who doesn't, then what happens is they have no other opportunities. So when I look at just the system and I look at how do we define guilt, it's like, who is guilty? Who is the guilty party? If a person doesn't have a way to provide for their family, if they don't have safe housing, if they're living in conditions that are subpar and conditions that you wouldn't even want to live for yourself, what do you expect is going to happen? And so I think as we are moving in this season to really, really think about how can we contribute, even as a mentor, to teaching someone another way. And whether it is to go inside of a prison or to start within a community school to offer a person an opportunity to see something different than they've seen before, I think that's how you can achieve true Teshuvah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, some 10 million people move through the criminal legal system every year. 10,000 are released from federal and state prisons every week. 650,000 from federal and state prisons a year. 9 million from jails, right? Put in 3 years, if statistics bear it out, 64% will return. In 5 years, between 76 and 80% will return. You know, I think the numbers answer the question of whether or not it's working, whether prisons help to facilitate Teshuvah. It facilitates a return to prison, but not a return to one's true self, not a return to the being or the spirit that God designed a person to be, right? For me, I think that accountability is what's missing, right? Because there's no healing without accountability, right? And there's no healing in the system. You know, and accountability is not having a person just sitting, vegetating in a cell, generating millions of dollars for corporations and industries. You know, accountability is how does this person who have caused harm, like myself, you know, the cosmic implications of what I've done is not lost on me. I left a tear in the fabric of life, a hole in the cosmos that'll never be filled, right? How can I give back, right? How can I prevent some other 15-year-old boy from making a rash decision, running away from home, right? And having their mother come home like my mother, not knowing where they were, if they were alive or dead, like she didn't know if I was alive or dead for months. You know what I'm saying? You have people on the inside who have had that journey and made that transformation, is able to offer some lessons and offer some service and stuff to society to help become a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. But the way things are designed is so adversarial. It's about winners and losers, this system. You know what I mean? And there is no concept of real accountability. You know, being hands-on when helping to bring balance where we have left imbalance. You know, the victim's sister in my case, when I was resentenced, and that's the only reason I'm here, by the way, because I was sent to prison to die. The only reason I'm here is because a recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling, Miller versus Alabama, and then supported by Montgomery versus Louisiana, ruled that it's unconstitutional to sentence children to mandatory life without parole. That's the only reason why I'm here, after 30 years of incarceration. I've been home now for going on two years. And I'm on lifetime parole, by the way. So, you know, I'm on parole for the rest of my life. I had to have permission to come here and observe Yom Kippur. So I embrace this moment with an appreciation that you might not understand, right? Because at any given time, they can snatch me back up and put me back in the prison, right? I'm telling you, when I came face to face with the victim's family in this case, after 30 years, and I waited 30 years for that, and I spoke to them in the courtroom, and she said, the sister of Angel Price said she believed me, and she said that she believed that I would do justice in the community. That meant more to me than the judge giving me a second chance. And yet, when she exchanged her information with my family and asked for my information because she wanted to stay in touch, and I asked my parole officer if I can reach out to her, she would like to. The answer was, that is not allowed. So there is no, in this system of zero sum, there is no facilitation of any avenue for reconciliation, for any avenue for healing, for any avenue for accountability, right? So I am supposed to stay in my lowest state, in my darkest state, for the rest of my life. You know, even though she has consented and she said she wanted to stay in touch. You know, and I think that is problematic because I don't think there is any true return until we are accountable, until we are able to face the people that we've hurt, right? And to apologize and to ask them how can we atone for the harm that we've caused them.
So I want to ask a question about hope, a question that really speaks to this state of despair and helplessness and powerlessness. When I was teaching on Rikers Island, I had the opportunity to teach with Professor Andrew Scott Nickey of Manhattan College. He's a professor of religion, and every semester he brings 10 of his students to Rikers Island to learn with 10 students who are detained there. And I served as the teaching assistant for the students who are detained on Rikers Island. And the last semester in the spring, I was working with women who were on the island, and they shared with me personal stories that related to our material. We were studying the theological and philosophical underpinnings of mass incarceration in our country, and many of the women shared stories of abuse, that they were survivors of abuse. One woman told me that she had survived abuse. She'd been on Rikers Island for months, didn't know when she would leave again, and had met many other women who were also survivors of abuse there. But that from this place of despair, despite all of that, she still found hope. And she defined hope as the ability to see beyond where you are. And so I want to ask the three of you, thinking about this system, if you could speak personally for a minute. How did you see beyond where you were? How did you find a new path for yourself going forward?
And I would have to first say that to be in this space today, my involvement with the Doe Fund, after doing over 19 years of my life in and out of prison, after going through the revolving door of our criminal justice system, and during those years of my life, Ghani just says something that I still struggle with, and it's not a matter for me of accountability. There is a point of accountability for the individual, but there's also the social and political responsibility that was instituted in particular communities of color when we began to think of poverty, when we think of being marginalized from the mainstream economy, when we start thinking about the conditions in which people are asked to survive, not live, survive. And those are two different perspectives and points for an individual to make a conscious, rational decision, which I still think when we hear the conversation today of reparations, when we hear the conversations of legalization of marijuana, how will we transfer that, proceeds to these poverty-stricken communities, when we begin to think of these things. So I think that's a two-way street. So let me first say that because that's one of my points. But for me, as it was mentioned earlier, I'm not one of those individuals who kind of came up in this society with the silver spoon. I'm one of those individuals that you would probably read or hear about that was birthed in the dregs of society. My parents weren't parents. I grew up in a foster care system. I already knew what society thought of me. So in turn, I don't know what society thought I would think of it. And I think that's one of the gists and issues that we do not want to address when we begin to think of populations that are impacted by our structural systems within our society, and we wonder why they're angry and why are they this and why are they that. How do you take a 6-year-old child and tell him you have to learn how to fight for yourself, you have to learn to defend yourself, you have to learn to do this at 6 years old, and then I grew up a little bit faster and harder to deal with the struggles of life at 6 years old. For me, after growing up that way, finding myself in prison at 20 years old, earning a GED at 26, thinking that somehow I was going to get out and believe in this American way, and I was going to be, because education is the key to tomorrow's future for those who prepare for it. I believe that. If you work hard, you get a shot at it. But once you do those things, what happened after being released in 1996 around the Clinton administration time, Hillary Clinton had a quote that she coined. She said, super predators. And I didn't know what a super predator was. I saw the movie Predator, but I didn't know what a super predator was. She was talking about young black men from inner cities who became the scapegoat for a system or for a political system for votes. We were put in this category that I wasn't even aware of. So when it was mentioned that once I got out, because I thought, okay, if I do this and go into the interviews and no longer do you have your high school diploma and none of these things, the question then became, have you ever been incarcerated? And no one prepared us from a structural, political, or social system of what that meant. But I learned what it meant very fast, and over 2.2 million other people, young black men from across the country, learned what that meant very fast. And for me, the introduction to where I'm at today, and I'm sorry to exhaust that, but I think it was very important that I say that, that this part began for me was through my educational aspirations and my educational pursuits. It was here that, and what commits me to this cause, because if Terrance Coffie is sitting up here, who's earned a BSW, a MSW, named Student of the Year, professor at New York University. I was one of the castaways that we were talking about earlier. So I wondered to myself, how much more human capital are we locking away in the cages based upon perceptions and beliefs that isolate these individuals and communities from participating in making our country be what it possibly could be. So, and that's where this began. I began my journey at an organization called the Doe Fund. They gave me the opportunity and the resources that I personally needed in order to build a life, and that was called the word opportunity. I got an opportunity to have a job that was paying me money. I got an opportunity to housing. I got an opportunity to education. And with that, it's where I not only found, I like to say just opportunity, but I also found my purpose. And I think that within our criminal justice system, what we have done is castrated a community, a society, and a people by caging them and by isolating them to maintain the same structural system in which this country was founded. And I'm going to stop there because we'll be in another class session, so no.
Well, I was there. So hope. My experience was completely different. I cannot say that I came from humble beginnings because I didn't. My parents, who are still married after 56 years today, they were owners of a Carvel franchise in Brooklyn for 20-something years, and then were restaurateurs. They wanted a life different from myself and my siblings, so we were raised in Long Island in Matterville. We were the only black family in our neighborhood. I was always ambitious, captain of every team, president of every club, classically trained in piano, flute, dance at Alvin Ailey. So I had everything. And what I was supposed to do was to go to college, because that's what you do. My father went to college, but my mother didn't. And that's what they set our lives up to do. And so I decided I wanted to go to an HBCU, historically black university, because I had been around students that were always white. All of my friends I grew up were. And I wanted to be around other kids that looked like me. So I went to Baltimore, Maryland, which was completely different, Baltimore City, than Manorville, New York. And I end up there also having a different shift, where though I'm happy because now I'm around people that are like me and look like me, I'm also being ostracized. Like, you talk like you're white, you think you're better than us, you're a little different. And I found myself trying to find a way to fit in. And so as I did that, I started, not going to class. I never cut class a day before in my life, but now I'm not going to school. I'm hanging out in the street, and I'm dating certain kinds of guys. And then I found myself selling drugs, doing what they were doing. Understanding now, I was raised in the church. I come from a strong family background. And so I knew, in theory, what I was doing was wrong. But I wanted to be accepted so bad that I just lived this life. Though going to school, I became division chairperson for Amtrak for New York and DC. I owned a business, it was opening another business, but in the midst of all of this, I ended up getting arrested for a drug conspiracy charge. And when I got to that county jail in Virginia, thinking that, one, I went to prison in my 30s, so just understand that I was an adult. Understand, how did I end up here at this particular time in my life? And getting there and thinking that, okay, I'm not a threat. I can bail out, and getting no bail told I'm a threat. And then actually having now to be in a completely new environment around things that I'm not used to. And so as I'm in this new environment, a county jail, and I'm meeting women and girls from the ages of 17 up to the ages of 70, who were there and had been criminalized for sexual violence, abuse, addiction, in and out of prison. I would see women go in and out, and then find out that the woman overdosed. There was a woman who told me that her father was raping her, and she took heroin to take the pain to go away. And that's how she was introduced to using drugs. And from this idea that I had of people using drugs because they want to, understanding now that people didn't use drugs because they wanted to, and that these were different coping mechanisms, and whether they were in the county jail, if they were poor and white or poor and black, it was the same thing. And so for me, my hope came from those women and came from the stories that I heard in a way that I was able to relate to a class of people, because there is levels of privilege in all races. And I didn't understand that there was really a difference until I spoke to them and they told me. And I realized at that point, to your point, that there was a level of accountability that I had to take because of the harm that I had contributed to. And I pled guilty. And when I got to federal prison, what was different was it wasn't so many women who had been struggling, at least in the camp where I was, financially because they were poor, but it was women. I was incarcerated with doctors, lawyers, judges, senators, high levels of education, but there was this thread of violence and abuse, sexual trauma, violence and abuse, and it didn't matter, and it was irrespective to race as it related to women. And the more I learned that women were going into prison at a 700% increase rate, and the more that I learned that women were being sentenced to life double the rate of men, and the more that I learned that it was irrespective to age even, that women are being, I had women we call grandma inside because she was in her 60s and coming in the door at that age, that there was time when I was graced and I was able to be released from prison, that there was work that I needed to do as it related to redemption. So getting and building the organization Liaison of Hope Ministries was birthed inside of that prison. But it wasn't prison that changed me, it was the women that I met that did. And it was the hope that they had given me, and understanding that I could not come back home because I could have done anything. I could have started another business, I could have went back to Amtrak, I could have done anything I wanted to do because I had support. I came home, I went to New York Theological Seminary, I started fellowships at Columbia University, and I knew that I could have done something, but it wouldn't have been my purpose or my calling if I didn't reach back and provide the same level of opportunity and resources to the women that I knew I had. I didn't have to worry about housing. I had a family to go home to. I didn't have to worry about paying bills because they made sure I was okay. So in order for me to know that I could contribute in a way that would help to empower other women to do the same things for themselves, it was for me to be able to create that hope that I was able to also get from them. You're welcome.
Well, you could imagine when I got arrested who was the first person I called on the telephone. Take a guess. Mom. After I disrespected her like that and ran away and had her worrying like that to the point where she stressed out so much she developed a tumor years later inside her womb that would require a complete hysterectomy. But I would call her first. Not homies and friends and stuff, I would call my mother. Because even though I act like I didn't know where the love was, I knew where the love was for real. And sure enough, she got on the Amtrak train, made it from Brooklyn to 34th Street, Penn Station, got on the Amtrak train and came down to Philly with a bag full of pajamas and underwear and everything that she thought I would need. And when she came to the police station, she did not chide me or anything, did not yell at me. She was just so happy that I was alive, right? It would take years of maturation to understand that kind of love, right? But, and she brought with her 3 books. The Autobiography of Malcolm X, The Autobiography of Nelson Mandela, and Mark Mathebani's Kaffir Boy. I don't know why she brought those 3 books. I would ask her many years later why she brought those books. And she was like, look, I wasn't trying to get you into their politics per se. their politics, whatever they were, you know what I'm saying? I just knew that these were two individuals, Malcolm and Mandela, that went to prison where you are, right? And you were in a place where I could not protect you. And I knew that they fared pretty well, and I was hoping that maybe there's something you can extract from their narrative that could hold you and, you know, make you turn out pretty well, too. And I think my mother was onto something. But with the turn of those pages, what it would open me up to bigger issues, right? Bigger struggles, real struggles that people are mired in all over the world, and that people are like ramming their heads again, putting their bodies and their families and everything at risk to try to make change. And it made me look at that and the puerile pursuits, selfish pursuits that I was on, right? And it just exploded brain cells, and it just gave so much volume to my self-accusing spirit. It would just grind me up in the darkness of my own cell every day, right? And lead me to spirituality. And I think in a situation like that, you need you need to be able to tap into something bigger than yourself. You know, especially when you find yourself in filthy cells with feces on the wall and nothing to clean it off with. You understand what I'm saying? And so you have to tap into something mighty to hold on to. You know, and so like Topeka said, I didn't turn out the way that I am today with this greater sense of social responsibility because of prison, but in spite of prison, right? And hope, not that I felt, entitled to be free one day. You know, I didn't feel like I was entitled. But I felt that some kind of grace, something good would happen that would allow me to try my hands at some of the noble ideas that were developing in my mind inside prison, right? Because of my family and how they were with me, I just knew that someday I would be able to make good with them and make good with the family that I had caused loss to. And I heard so I respect what you were saying too, Brother Terrence, about, you know, the larger accountabilities of the system, you know. But for me, on a personal level, the empowering conversation for me is how do I find the locus of my own agency to resist all of that, right? Because the first revolution and the most important revolution is the revolution of self. Kind of like what Lauryn Hill said, how are we going to win if we ain't right within, right? And so, yeah, I could get into an analysis of the crack. I got arrested during the advent of the crack cocaine era, right? I would go on to read Dark Alliance, Gary Webb's Dark Alliance, and Robert Parry's Lost History, The Conscious Cocaine, and Project Truth, and all of these things. So I know and I believe that sociologists and social scientists need to study the impact of the crack cocaine era on our communities. But I leave that analysis, you know, I can give it, but it sounds better coming from you, right? Not from me. Because for me, it sounds like I'm making an excuse. So I avoid that. When I did the podcast with the interview with Samantha Braun, frontline journalist Samantha Braun, called Living with Murder, a lot of my comrades and friends that heard the interview, they were like, I was looking for the radical Ghani, right? And I had to remind them, look, I'm talking to someone whose mother she survived Reginald Mcfadden. Reginald Mcfadden was someone in Pennsylvania prisons he had his life sentence commuted in 1994, and he went home and he went on a rape and murder spree. He raped and murdered 3 women. Samantha Braun's mom was the first person. She survived, but not before she was kidnapped, attacked, and brutally raped repeatedly. And my thing is, how do I have a conversation with this woman who this happened to her mother? And it took her 20 years to do a documentary about this. And she's sitting down talking to me, and we're having a human conversation about violence and about healing and about accountability and about things like Teshuvah. The minute I would bring in some broad political or social analysis about this, you know, the social economic dynamics that influenced my behavior, and there were many, right? In that conversation, the timing wouldn't be right. We're having a human conversation about violence, not about what causes violence, right? But about healing after violence.
Yes. I think we're hearing some very interesting things.
And that's something that the system gets in the way of.
Thank you. I just want to keep holding up what we are learning, really, especially today, about Teshuvah. And I think what you're saying is this question: Teshuvah doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in community. It has very real implications of life or death for some people, and that it requires an internal transformation, but also communal conversation. So thank you for teaching that too about Teshuvah. I also want to hold up what you said about your mother. Today we address God, Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu, God as parent, and it is that parental love that Rabbi Buchdahl spoke about, that love and grace, that is the source of our Teshuvah. So thank you for bringing that up.
No doubt.
In America today, 2.2 million people are in jails and prisons. 4.5 million people are on parole or probation. 1 in 37 adults lives under correctional control. Now, these horrifying statistics don't even take into account the effect of incarceration on the families of those incarcerated. Topeka, I want to ask you, you provide shelter and services to so many women who are coming home. What does the system do to families from what you have seen?
They incarcerate families also. So, I wasn't the person who did the time alone. My parents did, my brothers did, my friends did, my mentors did. Every time they had to go and come to, whether it was Virginia or Connecticut or Illinois, every time they're the ones sending money in because you get paid 5 cents an hour. So, for me to call home, the financial burden that it has on them, the emotional burden that it has on them, how they are being treated and criminalized for coming to visit as a loved one. Now they're stripped, they're searched, they're treated nasty from, officers at times. And I just need to shift for just 1 second to what you were saying, because it's really heavy on my spirit. And thinking and talking in this space and things of redemption and accountability. What I learned, and I'm getting emotional, excuse me. What I learned was that when I asked God for forgiveness, I was forgiven. There was no way for me, because I was engaged in selling drugs, a drug conspiracy. So there wasn't one particular person that I could go to and speak to and say, hey, how do I atone in that way? But I asked God to forgive me. And once I knew that I was forgiven with God, that I was redeemed. And in that redemption allows me to move forward in my life and not be held to the harm that I caused. That's why we pray and we ask for forgiveness. And what I hear you say, so often, yes, you know, God bless you for being able to get through 30 years and to be home now too. But it is not your responsibility to continue to hold that burden, because you have been forgiven. And this is what I keep hearing, and it's hurting me. Because we get to a place, and I think that's a lot of the problem that happens, that how much more do we have to pay our debt?
Right.
That there's all of these barriers. The fact that you have to ask, and I used to call them slave papers. I had to bring and carry a little paper around to say that I was allowed to leave the state. I had to at one time ask for permission to leave Manhattan to go to Brooklyn. And yet I paid my debt. The court said, God said I was forgiven. The court said I was able to be released. At what point is it over? And when can I truly move forward with my life to truly be whole and transformed? And so I'm sorry I'm having this conversation in front of everyone, but it's devastating to me, because it pains me. Because the level of freedom that we are able to even get within ourselves, because it is true. True transformation doesn't happen until it happens from within. And what I hear from you is that you have been transformed. And yet there are all of these other things that happen as to why some people get a second chance before they even have to hit a prison. Other people go into prison. It is socioeconomic, it is racial, it's all of those things. So we cannot act like that's not the case, right? But I think it's very, very incredibly important to understand that at some point, the true healing process is understanding that God forgives all of us and that we have grace every single day. And each day we are going to sin. Some sins are different than others, but we are not, through God's eyes, looked at differently for any sin. That's the God that I serve, and that's what I know.
Amen. Amen.
So we're definitely off script at this point.
We're off our script, but we're not off the script of the day, because this is the conversation of today. This conversation of divine forgiveness.
So I'm going to say this to you, sister, and I'm going to say this to everybody in this room, as a family. Because of the role I played in the narrative of violence and victimization and loss and pain, because of the irreparable harms, permanent loss, and lifelong traumas my hands brought to the lives and the family, because of the more righteous struggles that my ignorance and selfishness kept me from, because of the children in the neighborhood I was not a better example for, I, Kempis, Ghani, Songster, hereby pledge to be an upstanding member of my family and community, to be a positive example as well as a moral compass and motivating force in the lives of young people, to listen attentively to them, to always look for and speak life to their potentials, to teach them how to allow their intelligence to control their impulses and anger, to do all that I can to help steer them away from the kind of acts that can cause harm and loss and pain to others and that can lead them to prison. To do all I can to make our elders feel safe to resume their traditional places on the porches of their home, watching with love and care over the children playing safely in the neighborhoods. To be a source of safety and service for our children and elderly in the communities. To do all that I can to help clear the way for the creativity and brilliance of women and girls to shine through without their being disrespected. To be a proponent of strong family values, the importance of education, belief in oneself, honoring the immeasurable value of human life, and honoring one's place in the human's family. Through this pledge, I continue my conviction to a life of sacrifice and service to my family, to families who've lost loved ones to violence, to my community, to struggles that fight for everyone's right to life, and to making our communities more livable and safer and healthier places for its members. I hereby pledge to make violence and victimization no longer characteristics of our communities, and I make this pledge to you all and to you because you all deserve it from me. That pledge was born out of that consciousness that we're talking about. And so I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to take, that's something I got to work on, right? And maybe it's because I understand that a murder is not the moral equivalent of a robbery or a burglary or a pocketbook snatching. You dig what I'm saying? I could return your pocketbook. I could give you your money back. I could help fix your home back if I broke the lock on your door, whatever the case may be, and maybe we can heal after that. But a lost life is gone. And the mother of the person in my case, she died in 2016 without me ever getting the opportunity to look in her face and tell her how sorry I am. And so that is going to drive me, and I know that, and I'm sorry, it's just, I don't know, and I don't want it to be, listen, even though I tell my story a lot, it gets no easier every day with more increased consciousness. It gets harder because I want to separate myself from this. I don't want this to be a part of my narrative, a part of my history, but it is. I can't go back in time and change this. It's horrible. and I'm exhausted every time. I'm going to be tired. I'm going to fall asleep. When I go get back on the train, I'm going to probably sleep all the way back from Philly. I hope I don't miss my stop. You know what I'm saying? That's how tired I be. You know, I'm tired. I don't want to. I have a son now that's 9 months. No, he's 10 months today. You know, at some point I'm going to have this conversation with him when he's old enough to understand. How do I have this conversation? I think about all of this. You know what I'm saying? And so I appreciate you telling me that. You know what I mean? But you have, you know.
It's a process.
It's a process. I'm just telling you, it's a process.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Thank you. And I think what you just modeled for us, Yom Kippur is not just asking for atonement. It's not just prayer. It's committing to change. We as a community, we as a collective, we as individuals, commit to change. Thank you for showing us what that looks like, for letting us know that roadmap. Thank you. At its core, Teshuvah is really a theology of hope. It is a theology that believes in change, a theology that says systems, circumstances, and people can change and do change over time. So I want to take this back a little bit. As we're thinking about our country, we're thinking about the idea of sin in America, a sin that is mass incarceration that begins in slavery, a sin to which we all have to answer. What is one policy change? What is one reform that each of you would make? If you could make any policy change right now, what is a policy change you would make? Terrence, you want to start? Yeah, thank you.
Wow. I really have to honestly say, when I look at the criminal justice system, and I understand its makeup, and I understand the whole complexity, I would have to say everything. Because there's no way, you know, when I think of the criminal justice system, it's something Topeka said, but I have to put it in this way. It's like having a tree with all these bad apples, and we're going to pick off one apple to say, okay, now it's fixed. That's the criminal justice system, in my opinion. In the system in and of itself, because when we start thinking about over-policing in communities, when we start thinking about discriminatory arrests, discriminatory sentencing, things that are just common to the mind. So as far as policy change, the First Step Act was just recently passed by the Trump administration, and God forgive me for saying that name in a place of Jesus. My goal at this point in my academic and advocacy role is now to see that we revisit the First Step Act. I met with the officers of Cory Booker, and he has some legislation coming out that will, the second, I think it's called a second look. I'm not too sure what the name is going to be around it, but it's really focusing on the reentry aspect of the criminal justice system. You know, because the First Step Act in of itself is just that. It's a first step. I will say that. But when we began to, as I mentioned earlier, when we began to think about the funds that were allocated to reentry programs, to assisting educational programs, to provide for programs such as Topeka SAMS and the work that community groups are doing on the ground, when you allocate $285 million to an $80 billion industry, I have no idea what that is supposed to do. And when I started looking at 75% of that funding was actually invested in the Bureau of Prisons to create programs without investing in the voices of those who are doing the work on the ground, that's problematic for me. Because when we have men who are being released and when they get out of those systems because you've had some type of, okay, hey, you're getting out, don't get in no trouble, that was your new orientation and you get out, and we start looking at the structural issues of men who are going to get off the bus, step off at 34th Street with $40 in a bus ticket and say, okay, go. Go where? And these are the same historically, this is the same concept. And, back and I'm going to get to that. Back during the Emancipation Proclamation period, there was an initiative that was put forth called 40 Acres and a Mule. You guys may have heard of it. And it was this idea that the reformers of that time understood that if we did not provide the necessary resources for this population to build lives for themselves, the 40 acres would be a plot of land, and the mule would be the animal need to cultivate for the agriculture. They understood that if we did not provide for this population to practice self-sufficiency, to be a part of the economic system, to take care of themselves, that this same population will be exploited by the exact same system in which we were freeing them from. We didn't listen to the reformers of that time. Thus we had the black codes. Thus we found the same population being exploited by economic system in which we now, we refer to as convict leasing and all these other things from that time. But in today's time, we have a conversation, we call it the criminal industrial complex, where corporations use prison labor to fuel profits. The same individuals I work with will work for corporations while incarcerated, but yet when they get out, the bright idea, I worked for this corporation while I was incarcerated, so when I get out, I got some experience. But when you go to these corporations, what they're finding is that their policy says, I'm sorry, but we do not hire ex-offenders. So contrary to understanding, and I fully accept that, because Terrance Coffie is the one, I let individuals know, they hailed me for my extreme academic achievements and all these great things, but Terrance Coffie's life should not be an anomaly. Topeka Sam's life should not be an anomaly. Ghani's life should not be an anomaly if we have taken a vested interest in addressing the issues of criminal justice reform and recidivism, because either we're going to take this conversation to Congress and have ways in which we're going to invest the necessary funds as we begin to talk about this criminal justice reform system and allocate funding to reentry into programs and communities that are going to help us to build an equitable system. Or this conversation that we're having here on Yom Kippur, we'll see the same conversation in 10 years from now, wondering what did we do wrong or what we did not do right.
You're blowing a shofar for us right now. The shofar, the ram's horn, Maimonides says this is not only a wake-up call, but it's a call to see the injustice around us. And we end the day of Yom Kippur with the blow of the shofar. So keep going.
Okay.
Sound that alarm for us. As Justice Terence is doing as we close. What are we not yet awake to?
Well, I would like to see, to the legislative conversation, one, alternatives to incarceration. So legislation that's being passed where people are not having to go into prison at all. What are different opportunities that people can have, what a true second chance would be? There's a recent piece of legislation that passed in California, and I can't think of the bill number, but it's a primary caretaker's legislation that is pre-plea. So it affects women and men. Anyone who's the primary caretaker of a child under the age of 18 has an opportunity to do programming in the community, go to a specialized court, and then if they've done the things that they've done, their case is dropped, dismissed, and they don't even get a criminal conviction. There are more things like that that need to happen, because then it doesn't stop people from having the opportunities of not getting housing, jobs, education, etc. On the back end, I would like to see expungement, full expungement across the board. Because to the point of, if, even per the system as it stands today, it states that you do your time, and then once you're completed with your time, you should be finished. You think about debtor's prison, you think about all these things. You did your time, you're complete. I should not have to continue to either A, disclose why I went to prison. If so, I should not have to have it be held against me while I'm trying to get housing or job. And I paid my debt to society, whether that was through restitution or that was through prison time. I would like to see expungement. I would like to see parole implemented. I mean, I have a lot of legislation that I want to see that we work on, but I would like to see federal parole re-implemented so that people who actually are sentenced to life in prison, that they won't die in prison. They actually have an opportunity, because even to the brother's point, he was incarcerated at 15. I know I am not the same person I was when I was 15 years old. So despite what it was, at some point, when can we say enough is enough, and why are people having to lavish and die in prison? I met a woman from Pennsylvania just the other day when I was in Pennsylvania who did 47 years in prison. 47 years, I'm 43. I couldn't understand how that even happened. But because of these laws that are finally passing, that has given people some type of relief, but you don't get your time back, and then again you're released, and if you didn't, typically, if I was incarcerated for 47 years, it's likely that most of my support system passed away. So I don't have any support when I get out. And then I would say, no, I won't. I can say a lot of other things, but I want to give you some time to answer that question too, because I know where
I think we've analyzed incarceration through a variety of lenses. I mean, we've looked at it through the lens of, the costs and wastes that it puts on the nation's economy. We've analyzed it through the lens of how it perpetuates this country's age-old racial inequities. We've analyzed it even through its assault on education, right? And we see it as what it is. It is a social problem, but I think we've yet to really discuss the environmental and ecological impacts of mass incarceration and the prisons. The prison industrial complex is one of the most harmful industries to the ecosystem as we know it. It's a driver of population health inequities. The prison that I left from, Greater Fort, when I walked out of there, December 28th, 2017, after I spent 13 years in that particular prison. I would learn that prison is sitting on 2 Superfund sites, right? Superfund was this initiative that was enacted by Congress, I think it was in 1980 or 81, to where they would allocate a lot of money to clean up environmental, health hazard zones and stuff like that, like waste dumps. Rikers Island was built on a toxic landfill, right? In fact, this is the general theme of mass incarceration. 589 of the 6,000 or so federal and state prisons in this country is built within 3 miles of a Superfund site, 134 within 1 mile of a Superfund site. You know what I'm saying? This is an aspect of mass incarceration that rarely gets discussed. And what is the criteria for site selection of the building of a prison? Is it because, we just want to make sure it's far removed from any metropole, so the people can't just have communication with their families? No, that's not what it is. It's because the areas they select have already been destroyed by previous industries, be it coal, steel, waste dump, landfills, whatever the case may be, and it's dirt cheap and appealing to the industrialists. Right? Everywhere that they build these prisons, nothing grows. There's barren landscapes. Sometimes they build it even on deserts and with it's fragile ecosystems with endangered species, economically fragile communities. You know what I'm saying? With runoffs into the water supply, and things like this. And so prisons is an environmental concern that runs across all racial lines. Let's take SCI Fayette, for instance. Even though the majority of the people in that prison are people of color taken from Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, those people, and their experience of outbreak and gastrointestinal issues, leukemia, cancer, rashes, and all kind of stuff, the surrounding communities in Luzerne, which is predominantly white, is breathing in the flying ash that comes off, because the prison was built on an ash dump. And so the impact of this is felt across all racial lines, and so we can't see ourselves divided on this issue. That's their problem over there, and this is not my problem over here. Mass incarceration is a national health crisis, and it's not just about what it does to the 2.2 or 2.3 million people within the physical confines. It's about what it does to the rest of the 320 million of us.
And I would like to close with, wake up to, and I really truly want to close with this. You know, during my academic career, I had the opportunity to travel to Topeka, and I visited one of the concentration camp, and I was moved by one of the memorials I saw. It said, "Never again." When we think about maltreatment of people, if a system, any system, can operate where it does not see the individuals as human, we can justify any actions we perpetuate against that particular group or people in the name of whatever you want to call it. Mass incarceration, the criminal justice reform, criminal justice system, racism, or we can go down the line of schisms. But when we, at the core of all that, as I said earlier, what we're talking about is human rights. And I think that one of the things that we're going to have to understand, and Dr. King said this, and I'll close with this, that as a people, we may sit back and say, well, it's not my community, it's not my this, it's not my that. But for me, what I understand in this work is that, as Dr. King said, when injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. As we move forward in the future of this country, in these conversations, not only in criminal justice reform, when we think about the immigration population, when we think about the LGBT community, when we think about people who just want to be a part of a system where they've been just ostracized, the people in this room will be the individuals that rewrite the narrative on how we move forward as a country. The people in this room and in this new age of where we're at to be here having this conversation, we will be the voices that take away the pen from a society and a country that has decided what it's going to write, and we will take the pen and we will rewrite the narrative moving forward. That's right. And how we're going to do that, that's that we're going to define what community means. We are here to support you, and we're going to support one another, because that's how this is going to change. Because today's political atmosphere has drawn a keen line in the dirt for each of us in this room. And unless we've decided on this day that we're going to make that conscious effort to take that pen and rewrite the future, and rewrite our futures, and rewrite the futures of our children, and we might find ourselves in the same space again. And I'll stop there, I promise.
I want to thank you all so much for being here. I want to bless you as you go forward in this new year with continued strength. As you raise up questions, you raise up stories, you raise up examples for us to follow. And I want to bless us that we follow in your steps, and that we listen to the shofar you're blowing. We wake up to what you're talking about. I want to bless us in our work as a congregation, our justice work. And I'm honored to walk with you this year, into this new year, as we fight for a more just country. Good Yom Tov. Shana Tova. Thank you.